Hollywood has always sold the idea of perfect love, glamorous smiles, timeless icons, relationships that seem untouched by reality. But behind the applause and red carpets, many of these love stories were built under pressure most people never see. Silent sacrifices, careers shaped by fear, and relationships forced to survive in a world that was never ready to accept them. Some couples learned to hide in plain sight, others waited decades just to live honestly, and a few became symbols of change whether Hollywood wanted them to or not. What makes these stories unforgettable isn't just who they loved, it's what they had to risk to do it. Today, we're counting down 10 of the most talked about LGBTQ+ couples and icons in Hollywood history. From Golden Age legends who lived in secrecy, to modern stars whose love lives reshaped public conversation. And trust me, one story near the top of this list reveals just how much fame can demand in exchange for acceptance. If you enjoy thoughtful stories about the human side of Hollywood, consider subscribing. It's a quiet way to support deeper storytelling, no spotlight required. Now, let's begin with a legend whose music filled stadiums but whose private life stayed hidden for far too long. To the world, Elton John was larger than life, a musical genius with outrageous costumes, sold-out stadiums, and a confidence that seemed unbreakable. But behind the glitter and global fame, his private life told a far more complicated story. For decades, Elton lived under intense pressure to separate his public image from his personal truth. At the height of his success, the music industry still treated sexuality as a liability. Managers worried, labels hesitated, and silence became part of survival. That silence came at a cost. Elton later admitted that loneliness followed him everywhere, even at the peak of fame. Addiction, burnout, and emotional isolation slowly crept in, hidden behind chart-topping hits and extravagant performances. Everything began to change in the early 1990 seconds when he met filmmaker David Furnish. Unlike the chaos of Elton's public life, their relationship grew quietly. There were no grand announcements, no dramatic headlines, just stability, something Elton had never truly known. When they entered a civil partnership in 2005, it wasn't just a legal milestone, it was a statement that felt overdue. By the time they married in 2014, public opinion had shifted, but the emotional journey had already been long and difficult. Together, they built a family, welcomed children, and embraced philanthropy, particularly in the fight against HIV and AIDS. For Elton, love didn't just offer happiness, it brought accountability, structure, and healing. Looking back, Elton has said that fame gave him everything he thought he wanted, but love gave him what he actually needed. Not applause, not approval, but someone who saw him without the costume. His story reminds us that even icons aren't immune to fear. And sometimes, the bravest act isn't standing on a stage, it's choosing to live honestly once the spotlight fades. And if you think surviving fame was difficult, wait until you hear about the legend who was forced to hide his truth entirely, even as he became one of Hollywood's most adored faces. To audiences around the world, Rock Hudson was the definition of classic Hollywood masculinity. Tall, handsome, and effortlessly charming, he became one of the biggest romantic leading men of the 1,950 seconds and 1,960 seconds. But behind that carefully crafted image was a life built on secrecy. At a time when being gay could instantly destroy a career, Hudson was forced to live under constant surveillance. Studio executives controlled his public persona, arranging dates, managing rumors, and protecting the illusion at all costs. His success depended not just on talent, but on silence. Friends later recalled how isolating that silence became. Fame brought luxury and admiration, yet Hudson lived with the fear that one wrong moment could end everything he had worked for. Relationships were kept private, often hidden entirely, leaving little room for stability or openness. In the early 1,980 seconds, Hudson formed a close relationship with Mark Christian, a young actor who lived with him during his final years. But even then, honesty came at a price. As Hudson's health declined, the truth he had been forced to suppress for decades was about to surface in the most public way imaginable. In 1985, Rock Hudson became the first major Hollywood star to publicly disclose an AIDS diagnosis. The announcement sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry and beyond. For many Americans, it was the first time the AIDS crisis felt personal, human, and undeniable. Hudson's death later that year at age 59 marked the end of an era but also the beginning of a cultural shift. His illness forced Hollywood and the public to confront realities they had long ignored. Behind the polished image was a man who had spent his life performing a role far more demanding than any he played on screen. Today, Rock Hudson is remembered not only for his films, but for the quiet courage that emerged at the end of his life. His story stands as a reminder of what fame once demanded and how much was lost because of it. RuPaul represents boldness, color, and unapologetic self-expression. As the face of Drag Race, he helped transform drag culture from the margins into a global mainstream phenomenon. Yet away from the spotlight, RuPaul's personal life followed a very different rhythm. Long before fame reached its peak, RuPaul met Georges Labar in the mid-1990 seconds. While RuPaul built a career rooted in visibility and performance, Labar lived largely outside the entertainment industry as a painter and rancher. The contrast between their worlds became the foundation of their relationship. Rather than merging fully into celebrity life, Labar remained distant from Hollywood's noise. RuPaul has often described their bond as intentionally private, even unconventional. They spent long stretches apart, lived in different cities, and resisted the public expectations placed on famous couples. That distance wasn't a weakness, it was protection. As RuPaul's fame exploded, especially with the global success of Drag Race, public scrutiny intensified. Interviews, speculation, and pressure followed. Yet, details about his relationship remained scarce by design. Love, for RuPaul, was something to be preserved, not performed. When the two quietly married in 2017 after more than 2 decades together, the announcement surprised many fans. There was no spectacle, no red carpet reveal. Just confirmation that a relationship built outside the spotlight had endured longer than most celebrity marriages ever do. RuPaul has said that fame rewards attention, but real love requires boundaries. In an industry that often demands constant exposure, choosing privacy became a radical act. Their story challenges the idea that visibility must define authenticity. Sometimes, the strongest relationships are the ones that refuse to become entertainment at all. While RuPaul mastered the balance between public identity and private love, the next story explores a different kind of tension, one where silence followed success for years, even at the height of television fame. Neil Patrick Harris built his career on versatility. From child star to sitcom icon, then respected Broadway performer, his public image evolved with precision and control. For years, that control extended to his private life. As his fame grew, especially during the rise of How I Met Your Mother, Harris kept his relationships out of the spotlight. At the time, leading men on network television were still expected to fit a narrow mold. Risking that image could mean stalled opportunities or quiet exclusion. Behind the scenes, Harris had already found stability with actor and chef David Bertka. Their relationship developed away from cameras, industry gossip, and headlines. There were no public hints, no strategic reveals, just two people choosing normalcy in an industry that rarely allows it. When Harris came out publicly in 2006, the announcement was calm, measured, and deliberate. There was no scandal, no dramatic confession. Instead, it reframed how audiences viewed leading men on television. His career didn't collapse, it expanded. Over time, Harris and Bertka embraced a more visible life together. Marriage followed, children followed, and what once seemed risky slowly became routine. Still, the pressure never fully disappeared. Being seen as a model family came with expectations of perfection that few couples can realistically meet. Harris has spoken openly about the difference between privacy and secrecy. One is rooted in fear, the other is rooted in choice. His journey reflects the shift Hollywood has undergone slowly, unevenly, but undeniably. Their story isn't about rebellion. It's about timing, restraint, and understanding when silence protects and when it no longer needs to. Public acceptance came gradually for Neil Patrick Harris, but the next story reveals a star who chose silence far longer, remaining at the center of fame while keeping his personal life almost completely out of view. Jim Parsons became one of television's most recognizable faces almost overnight. As Sheldon Cooper on The Big Bang Theory, his performance turned him into a cultural phenomenon and one of the highest-paid actors on TV. Yet while his character dominated pop culture, Parsons himself remained carefully guarded. During the peak years of the show, Parsons kept his personal life firmly out of public view. Fame came fast, and with it came scrutiny that extended far beyond his work. In an industry still uneasy about leading men who didn't fit traditional expectations, discretion felt like the safest option. Behind the scenes, Parsons had already built a long-term relationship with art director Todd Spiewak. The two met in the early 2000s, long before red carpets, awards, and global recognition entered the picture. Their bond formed quietly, grounded in normal routines rather than celebrity spectacle. Parsons never staged a dramatic coming-out moment. Instead, his truth surfaced gradually through interviews, acceptance speeches, and simple acknowledgments that refused to sensationalize his private life. The approach was subtle but powerful. It shifted attention back to his work, while still affirming who he was. When Parsons and Spiewak married in 2017 after more than a decade together, it felt less like a headline and more like a natural continuation of a life already lived honestly. By then, public attitudes had evolved, but the years of restraint reflected how carefully that honesty had been managed. Parsons has often spoken about the difference between privacy and denial. For him, waiting wasn't about shame, it was about control. Choosing when and how to speak became a way of protecting both his career and his relationship. His story highlights a quieter form of courage, not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that refuses to let fame dictate the terms of a personal life. Silence served Jim Parsons well during the height of his success. But the next story follows a couple whose relationship played out very publicly, bringing admiration, backlash, and intense scrutiny along the way. Ellen DeGeneres built her career on relatability, a warm sense of humor, daytime television success, and an image rooted in kindness made her one of the most influential figures in American entertainment. That image, however, was shaped by risk long before it became mainstream. In the late 1990 seconds, Ellen's decision to come out publicly marked a turning point in television history. The move cost her dearly. Her sitcom was canceled, opportunities vanished, and she faced years of professional uncertainty. The industry's message was clear: honesty came with consequences. Years later, as her career recovered and The Ellen DeGeneres Show became a daytime staple, Ellen met actress Portia de Rossi. Their relationship unfolded in full view of the public, at a time when same-sex couples were becoming more visible but not necessarily more accepted. The two married in 2008, turning their personal commitment into a cultural moment. For many viewers, they represented progress and hope. For others, they became targets of criticism and relentless scrutiny. Visibility amplified everything: support, expectations, and judgment. Over time, cracks appeared in the carefully maintained image. As workplace allegations and public backlash surrounded Ellen's show years later, the pressure intensified. Through it all, Portia remained a constant presence, often choosing privacy over public commentary. Their relationship endured shifts in public perception, career highs, and moments of controversy. What once symbolized breakthrough visibility eventually became a reminder of how quickly admiration can turn into critique when fame and expectations collide. Ellen's journey illustrates how being a symbol can become a burden. Love doesn't exist in a vacuum when the public feels ownership over your story. Public visibility shaped every chapter of Ellen's relationship, but the next story moves in the opposite direction, toward a partnership built almost entirely away from headlines, sustained by time rather than attention. Lily Tomlin's career has always defied easy categories. From groundbreaking comedy to acclaimed dramatic roles, she became one of the most respected performers of her generation, sharp, fearless, and unmistakably original. Her personal life followed a quieter path. Tomlin met writer Jane Wagner in the early 1970 seconds, long before public conversations around sexuality became widespread. At the time, openness carried real professional risk, especially for women working in mainstream entertainment. Rather than making statements, they chose consistency. For decades, their relationship existed outside the spotlight. There were no carefully staged interviews or public declarations. Wagner focused on writing, often collaborating creatively with Tomlin, while their partnership remained steady behind the scenes. The absence of spectacle became a form of protection. As cultural attitudes slowly evolved, Tomlin and Wagner continued living as they always had together, but on their own terms. When they finally married in 2013 after more than 40 years as a couple, the moment felt understated. No headlines chasing controversy, just a confirmation of something that had already endured. What makes their story remarkable isn't secrecy or rebellion, it's longevity. In an industry built on reinvention and constant exposure, choosing a private, stable life became its own quiet statement. Tomlin has often spoken about how time reshapes perspective. Fame fades, applause softens. What remains are the relationships that survive without needing approval. Her partnership with Wagner reflects a version of success, rarely highlighted, one defined by patience rather than visibility. Their story offers a pause in the list, a reminder that not every impactful relationship needs drama to matter. Sometimes, resilience shows itself through consistency, not conflict. Longevity defined Lily Tomlin's partnership, but the next story returns to a very different pressure, one faced by a Hollywood heartthrob whose image depended on staying silent for nearly an entire lifetime. Richard Chamberlain's face once defined romantic television. As the leading man of Dr. Kildare and later the epic star of the Thornbirds, he became one of the most admired heartthrobs of his era. That admiration came with strict conditions. During the height of his fame, Hollywood studios carefully controlled Chamberlain's image. His career depended on maintaining a fantasy that audiences expected, and any deviation from that script could have ended everything. In an era dominated by rigid masculinity and fear of scandal, silence wasn't a choice, it was a requirement. Behind the scenes, Chamberlain lived a life divided. While success brought wealth and opportunity, it also demanded constant vigilance. Personal relationships were kept hidden, and emotional honesty was postponed in favor of professional survival. The cost of that delay lingered quietly for decades. Chamberlain remained one of the industry's most reliable leading men, well into the 1,980 seconds and 1,990 seconds. Yet the truth of his private life stayed largely unspoken until much later, when the landscape had begun to shift. Only then did he speak openly about his sexuality, reframing a career once shaped by restraint. By the time he shared his story publicly, the confession felt reflective rather than defiant. Chamberlain didn't accuse Hollywood, he described it. The system, as it existed, left little room for openness. Success required performance not just on screen, but off it. His passing in 2025 marked the end of a generation shaped by unspoken rules. Chamberlain's legacy now carries dual weight: the performances that defined an era and the personal truth that had to wait for safety. His story reminds us that for some stars, honesty wasn't delayed by fear alone, but by timing, culture, and an industry unwilling to change. Richard Chamberlain's silence reflected old Hollywood's strict boundaries, but the next story shows how a modern icon chose a different strategy, balancing fame, humor, and openness while redefining success on his own terms. Nathan Lane built his reputation on precision, timing, and intelligence. From Broadway to Hollywood, his performances carried sharp wit and emotional depth, earning him respect across stage and screen. Despite that visibility, his personal life remained carefully managed. During the height of his film career in the 1,990 seconds, Lane faced a difficult calculation. Leading comedic roles were plentiful, but openly gay actors were still seen as risks by studios. Opportunities existed, but only under certain conditions. Silence became part of the professional strategy. Behind the curtain, Lane had already found stability with producer and writer Devlin Elliott. Their relationship developed away from industry gossip, anchored in normal routines rather than red carpets. While Lane's characters became cultural landmarks, his private life stayed intentionally understated. Lane came out publicly in 1999, not through spectacle, but through a quiet acknowledgement during a newspaper interview. The moment wasn't designed to shock, it simply clarified what many had long suspected. Still, the decision carried consequences. Certain roles disappeared, others never arrived. Over time, Lane's career shifted back toward the stage, where talent outweighed image. Broadway rewarded honesty in ways Hollywood often didn't. His performances deepened, and recognition followed. The space to live openly expanded as the industry slowly changed. When Lane and Elliott married in 2015 after nearly 2 decades together, the milestone felt earned rather than celebratory. Their partnership had already endured the most challenging years when discretion felt necessary and honesty felt risky. Lane's story illustrates a form of resilience shaped by patience. Success didn't come from confrontation, but from endurance. Choosing when to speak became as important as choosing what to say. His journey reflects a generation of performers who learned to survive first, then, when the time finally felt right, to live freely. Patience defined Nathan Lane's path, but the final story on this list brings us full circle, returning to a global icon whose influence reshaped visibility itself, both on stage and far beyond it. Freddie Mercury commanded the world's biggest stages with unmatched confidence. As the voice of Queen, he became a symbol of power, freedom, and theatrical brilliance, someone who seemed fearless in front of millions. Off stage, the reality was far more complex. Mercury lived at a time when openness came with consequences few global stars could afford. While his music pushed boundaries, his personal life remained guarded. Relationships were intense but private, shaped by trust and discretion rather than public affirmation. Friends later described a man caught between extremes. Fame brought wealth, admiration, and creative freedom. Yet it also magnified isolation. Mercury protected his inner world carefully, choosing who was allowed inside and how much of himself could be seen. As the AIDS crisis emerged in the 1,980 seconds, speculation followed him relentlessly. Still, Mercury refused to let illness or identity define his public narrative. He continued recording, performing, and creating until the very end, determined to be remembered for his work rather than his condition. When his death was announced in 1991, the truth of his illness and sexuality became impossible to ignore. The impact was immediate and global. Mercury's passing forced conversations that had long been avoided, humanizing a crisis many preferred to keep distant. In retrospect, his legacy carries a profound duality. Freddie Mercury lived loudly through music, but quietly through love. The contrast doesn't diminish his story, it deepens it. His refusal to be reduced to a single narrative remains part of his power. Mercury didn't seek to represent a movement, yet his life and death helped reshape how the world understood visibility, vulnerability, and courage. When the spotlight fades, what remains isn't the legend, it's the human being behind it. These stories remind us that fame often magnifies pressure, not freedom, and that love in Hollywood has rarely been simple. Some of these icons lived openly, others waited decades. A few never fully had the chance. Yet each journey reflects resilience in its own form, through silence, through patience, or through the quiet decision to live honestly when the time finally felt safe. So tell me, which story stayed with you the most? And whose journey deserves a deeper look in a future episode? If you appreciate thoughtful storytelling about the human side of Hollywood, consider subscribing. It's a small gesture that helps keep these stories alive.